Longtemps, le bois a été la principale ressource du Gabon. Aujourd'hui, les revenus du pétrole ont arraché le pays à son Moyen-Âge africain pour le propulser d'un coup dans l'âge moderne.
Gabon, also known as Gabonese Republic, is a country on the west coast of Central Africa and gained her independence from France on the 17th of August 1960. And every 17th of August, this day is celebrated by the Gabonese to remember their independence from their colonial masters, with French being the official language of the country, where it is known as Republique Gabonaise. Located on the equator, it is bordered by Equatorial Guinea to the northwest, Cameroon to the north, the Republic of Congo on the east and south regions, and to the west is the Gulf of Guinea, a country which is known for its dense rainforests and vast petroleum reserves, is no stranger to various forms of occultic and ritualistic killings, where vast majority believe that the victim's death, suffering, or the harvesting of their organs would grant them great amounts of wealth and spiritual powers. It is for this reason that ritual crimes are of unspeakable violence and cruelty, where the victim sees himself or herself outright dead. It is always a question of suffering to the maximum. Like in some African countries, most of the perpetrators of these crimes carry them out on other people's behalf, such as politicians or other men in power, with these people being referred to as sponsors, and who are convinced that they will be able to win elections or to obtain power through these sacrifices. After all, it's no coincidence that Gabon reports an increase in ritual murders during election periods, and the arrival of a multi-party system in Gabon had largely contributed to these various explosions of ritual crimes. However, despite Gabon's long history with ritual murders, one in particular would horrify the country and is still being talked about in Gabon to this day. But before I do get into this disturbing true life story, if you're a lover of disturbing, dark and spooky true stories presented narratively, then you might consider subscribing, turn on all post notifications, and proceed to take the like button on a tourist visit to the Akanda National Park along the city of Libreville. And with that said, let's get into today's story. Not much is known about Théophile Mbantem's early life, other than the fact that he was born in 1950 in the West African nation of Gabon, which was 10 years before Gabon got her independence. In the 1970s, Mbanteme, known short for Ntem, married a woman and he would later go on to have 2 children. As time went by, Mba became deeply interested in the traditional African religion of animism and fetishism. Animism is the worship of man-made objects, such as statues or jewelries, also places and creatures, and with the belief that they all possess a distinct spiritual essence. Or, in simpler terms, it is the belief that a spirit or force lives in both animate or inanimate objects. While fetishism, on the other hand, is the belief that natural things like trees, rivers, have souls or spirits within them, and they do possess supernatural powers. Mba would later go on to become a member of a religious sect known as Mvo Ening, which translates into English as Tranquil Life. This religious sect, which seemed like more of a cult group, was led by a man from Equatorial Guinea named Esono Mba Philomeno, who there was no information or profile about him. After a couple of years of being part of this religious group, Mbantem would eventually decide to start his own Mvo Ening temple. This temple would be located at Owendo, a suburb at the port of Libreville, which is the capital of Gabon. With the help of his family and a few aides, he would advertise his temple for people who were interested in joining. And very soon, he began recruiting followers through some religious exercises and continuous advertisement of his newly formed religion in newspapers, where he would proclaim himself as a traditional faith healer. Within a couple of months, Mba would actually start to gain several followers, and among his followers was a man named Raymond Unve Owono, who would become his most loyal and favorite follower. Raymond would also become his assistant and right-hand man, who he would delegate some tasks to when his hands become full, or who would take care of things when he wasn't around. Over the next couple of years, during the early to mid-70s, his religious group and following would continue to rise, and they would keep on worshipping both man-made and natural objects, till at some point, when Mba became too obsessed with his cult that he felt he needed more, and to get more, he believed he needed spiritual powers. Then, starting in 1987 to 1988, Mbantem would begin to deviate from his seemingly normal mode of worship into something darker and more sinister. As patients who sought after Mba's healing services began to increase, his traditional healing services also began to boom. One of these customers was a certain man by the name of Andre Ondondon. Andre was from Oyem, which is a small city in northern Gabon, and was an English teacher at the Oyem local high school. The man would be stricken by an unknown sickness and would begin to look for a cure for his condition. And that was when he saw a newspaper ad where Mba had advertised his healing abilities as a tradi patrician within his temple. Over the next couple of days, he would travel to Libreville to get help. After traveling for a couple of days, Andre would finally get to Mba's temple. And during their first meeting, Mba would go on to tell Andre that the cause of his illness was his wife and children, and that the solution to his problem was for them to first start by getting rid of his family in order to save his own life. But however, to bring his youngest child while coming to his temple for the next appointed visit. Shockingly, Andre would agree to this. He believed Mba and would eventually chase his wife and 3 of his 4 children out from his house, keeping only the youngest child, who at that time was just 3 years old. Over the next couple of days, Andre would travel again to Libreville together with his youngest son to go see Mba at his temple. And when they arrived, Mba would start working on healing Andre of his sickness so as to effectively cure him. Several days following Andre's trip to Libreville, his family has not heard from him. When days turned into weeks, his parents would then start to search for their son Andre. The search will lead them to the temple of Mbantem. On reaching the temple, Mbantem would personally greet the family. Andre's parents would begin to question the self-proclaimed high priest and his followers about their son's whereabouts, and Mba would begin to tell them about the healing process they had underwent and how their son had returned to his native home Oyem after their appointment. However, the family, who sensed that something was fishy, didn't buy the story. They never believed it and decided to inform the Gendarmerie Brigade, which is the Gabon's national police force responsible for law enforcement. In April 1988, the Gabonese police and Gendarmerie Brigade would arrive on the scene to conduct a search with a series of questions and would effectively begin their investigation. It was during this investigation that Mba and his cohorts would still maintain their story of how their client Andre had gone home after being cured of his illness by them. At some point, Mbantem's followers started acting hostile and became violent towards them, trying to prevent the police from gaining access into the temple. The police would, however, overpower the Mvo-Ening followers and force their way into the temple and arrested everyone inside, including a 32-year-old Mbantem and his assistant, Raymond. During the rough encounter, a 3-year-old child would be found on the scene, which was by the temple. Luckily, the 3-year-old child would turn out to be Andre's youngest son by the name of Habat, who had traveled with his father to the temple days ago to meet the priest for healing. Being a witness to the gruesome and horrific act that has been committed by Mba and few of his followers, he would then, in a childlike manner, begin to review what he saw happened. After hearing this testimony from a young Habat, who as a child wasn't so capable of lying, the gendarmeries, after a big fight with the suspects, decided to arrest the leader, Mbantem, and his fellow cult gang. It was while they were in prison that they would begin to confess their heinous crimes. While Mbantem's followers were interrogated and questioned, something unusual happened. Most cults are centered around a charismatic leader, with all the members being devoted and loyal to the leader. However, that was not the case with Mba's followers. All of his followers, except for a selected few, immediately began to throw each other under the bus in an effort to save themselves and get a deal. All of them, however, pointed the finger at Mbantem and Raymond. Andre's 3-year-old son, when questioned again, would even testify against him, stating what he saw. The following is a narration of the bone-chilling events heard by the law enforcement that led to the sudden disappearance of his father, Andre. After Andre had finally returned to Owindo, Libreville for the second time, following his agreement with his trusted healer, Mba, to take away his wife and other 3 children from his home, as they were told by Mba as being the constant cause of his illness and deteriorating health, Andre would make his way to Mba's temple, where he would meet them and tell him that he had done as he had said. And while his family were no longer with him, he had come with his youngest son and was now ready for the healing process. The next day, Mba and his assistant Raymond were ready, as Andre would begin to undergo some treatment based on deductions that had been extracted from iboga. The iboga is a rare African medicinal plant used for ritual and ceremonial purposes in some African cultures. And the root bark of this iboga plant can also be used for both physical and spiritual healing. Depending on climatic conditions, this plant only reaches maturity after 5 to 10 years of being planted and grown. It is often allowed to reach that time frame, so it would give the plant a high concentration of an alkaloid substance known as ibogaine, which is often found in the root bark of the iboga plant. This powerful substance, when extracted and taken in a certain amount, can cause hallucinogenic effects, which is kinda like a dream-inducing state. Just like they had done during the first visit, Mbantem and Raymond would offer Andre some of these iboga beverages. However, things didn't go quite as planned this time. Andre accepted the iboga, but once he drank the concoction, he realized that something was wrong, and he either started acting visibly alarmed or confrontational. That must have been the moment that he realized that he had been drugged. The confrontation by Andre had made Mbantem and Raymond to panic, and they quickly started to beat him. At some point, both men would go further to beat him with a club, and he would lay flat on the ground as he had been weakened. He was then tied and would be severely stabbed to death, and then driven in a car to an unknown location around Oyem, which was Andre's own town. Andre's organs were then harvested, while his body would be disposed of in a ravine, before having his organs served to the rest of the spiritually evolved followers in the temple. In a ceremony led by Mbantem, members of the cult ate Andre's stomach contents, which included the liver, the heart, lungs, tongue, and the genitals, in what their leader called a sacred dish. Some of the worshippers were unaware of the contents, and we know this because Mbantem would reveal this before the Assize Court of Libreville. Andre's youngest son Herbert had witnessed the events within the scene that led to his father's execution all this time. In a twisted chain of events, a 3-year-old was to be the next in line on the list to be killed and fed on. He was actually a special order from a regime baron who loves fresh kid pulpits in well-seasoned broths. Actually, it was for this reason that Mba had asked Andre to bring his youngest son with him for the supposed healing. On June 18, 1988, which was 2 months following the arrest and series of interrogations, one of the followers would lead the gendarmerie to the ravine where the body of Andre had been disposed of. It was at that location that the horror scene would be discovered. Lying in that ravine was the mutilated and decaying body of the English teacher, whom his several organs had been removed. Prior to the incident that led to this arrest and their confession, Mba and Raymond had started this act of cannibalism years prior to the death of Andre, and they do this by picking either one of his followers or patients who came seeking his healing services. He would then offer them some special kind of food prepared with iboga, which they would gladly eat, and with the followers believing that what they ate would grant them some sort of spiritual powers. After the victim had fallen unconscious due to being induced or poisoned, Mbantem and Raymond would then either begin to smother or strangle them, before Mba and his right-hand man Raymond would remove and harvest the organs of the dead man. They would also remove the tongue and genitalia before cooking them and then eating them, and then serving them to the rest of the unsuspecting followers. Afterwards, Mbantem and Raymond would place the body in a car and drive the body to a nearby ravine to dispose it of. This act had been done without being detected by the Gabonese authorities for a good number of months to possibly years, until in 1988 when he killed his last victim and the last one that would get him caught, which would turn out to be Andre. During his investigation, his followers would also deny being aware that they had on numerous occasions consumed human flesh. The police would also arrest Mbantem's wife, who was aware of his actions but did nothing to stop them. While speaking, she would reveal something very disturbing. She would state that two of Mbantem's victims were two of his young children. She said that her husband has already eaten more than 6 people, including his own daughter, and the child she was expecting. It must be said that they have a preference for the fresh flesh of kids, as it was revitalizing for them. Some of his victims, Mba did confess to. In his statement, he also stated that he thought that he did his 2 children a favor by consuming their bodies, and that his children were still alive inside his body. On counting, Mbantem did admit having killed and cannibalized 6 of his victims, including his own children. This case, when it broke out, did captivate the attention of everyone in Gabon during the late 80s, and it was reported in every newspaper with an infamous and well-known picture being taken, which shows Mbantem with a dagger placed and held in his mouth, while he displayed 2 bottles of fetishes in his hand, as staged by the Gendarmerie Brigade officers, and with one of these bottles containing a human tongue. All were captured by the Gabon journalist photographer L'Union, which in English means the Union, a Gabon daily newspaper. Following their gruesome confessions, Mbantem, Raymond, his wife and 3 of his other devoted followers would be put on trial. The trial would attract a huge publicity, with a large crowd showing up to watch and document every statement and question as they unfold. In a trial which lasted for 3 days, the court prohibited other details about the ritual and the court from being released due to the disturbing and gruesome level of mutilation, cannibalism, and witchcraft practices that are taking place in that temple between Mba and the rest of his cult gang. On November 2nd, 1988, which was 7 months after they had been confronted and caught by Andre's family and the Gabonese authorities at the temple, they were all found guilty. Mbantem was sentenced to death. His assistant and right-hand man, Raymond Unve Owono, was sentenced to life imprisonment with hard labor for aiding in the cannibalism ceremonies by knowingly serving human flesh to worshippers. Mbantem's wife would be sentenced to 5 years imprisonment with hard labor, while the 3 other followers put on trial all got suspended sentences due to a solid lack of evidence against them. Following the sentences and while in the Son Famille Central Prison located in the capital city of Libreville, Mbantem would go on to be described as a model prisoner by the Gabonese officers during the 90s and 2000s, regularly holding prayer sessions in his cell and following all the prison rules, having never been disciplined once. However, his execution would never come to pass, because in February 2010, Gabon would abolish the capital punishment, causing Mbantem's sentence to be commuted down to life in prison. In Gabon, the law has stated that elderly prisoners or those who have been in prison for 30 years or more can get a presidential pardon and conditional release. On September 30th, 2020, which was just short of 32 years after his sentencing and 33 years of being in prison, Mbantem would decide to take advantage of this, and he would send a letter to the Ministry of Justice in Gabon requesting a pardon and early release due to his good behavior and conduct while still in prison. In another letter which he sent on October 2020, Mbantem would claim that he was innocent and that the killing of Andre was an accident. He also denied ever eating human flesh and that he had an alibi for most of the crimes he was accused of. Mbantem went on to state that he never confessed to anything and that the police told newspapers that he did, and that the press attributed fake quotes to him. And he also alleged that the police and the former government back then, led by Omar Bongo, were persecuting him and trying to destroy his religion. No response has ever been given to this letter, and he remains in prison to this day. As of 2022, he is 72 years old and would be described as one of the oldest prisoners in Africa.